there's a question in the audience. Just remember, this is not a public hearing, so we're not taking testimony. Just
yeah, Charlie is old now.
Okay.
I'm Charlie Heinonen.
Why don't you come up to the mic if you wouldn't mind, so that people can hear you.
Hi, I'm Charlie Heinonen. I'm with the City of Old Town. I've been I'm not a member, I'm the secretary to the Landfill Advisory Committee. In other words, I work for Old Town. Old Town basically, up to this point, has supported financially, in other words, the Landfill Advisory Committee. We don't want to dismiss the Landfill Advisory because it actually has a very good function of bringing the operator, the state, municipalities, and the public together for a conversation to develop, to know what the issues are and all of that. The committee has had some real issues of finding out where are they, what should they do, in other words, what is their real function. The city feels that the city itself has the ability to act as interveners, appeal anything, in other words, and any individual that's harmed has the ability to do that on themselves. This committee, it hasn't been defined who do they answer to. Who is their answering? Or do they answer to the city? Do they answer to the state? And I think these are the issues that really need to be talked about prior to any giving them authority to appeal, to do anything else. I think Peggy Daigle, our city manager, wrote you a letter, discussing, what our opinions are about the board. It certainly has a function, but we don't really believe that it should be appealing decisions itself. If they want to come back to the city, have the city do that, I think that's fine. There are other issues in there that I think they really need to decide. They have no bylaws. They've been in operation now for 3 years. They still haven't decided to have a procedure. So I think these things really need to be addressed. Is who do they answer to? Do they answer to the city? Do they answer to the state? Who is going to fund all of this? At this point, we have. But if you give them the ability to start doing other things, who is going to fund all of that?
You're the expert.
Yeah, I know. Thanks. I'm just going to live with this one for a while. I guess I would make 2 quick points. The first is that this Landfill Advisory Committee doesn't serve just Old Town. It serves 3 basically municipal units, 2 towns and the tribe. So they are supposed to be, and the towns, the municipalities, and the tribe choose the members of the committee, their own representatives on this. The number of slots is outlined by law, but the towns involved actually choose who they are, and those members are answerable to the town. And furthermore, I think the expectation was this group is supposed to come up with advisory recommendations and then give them to all the towns. And then the towns can do what they want with them. That, I think, was the expectation of how it was supposed to work. What's tended to happen is they haven't been given timely information in order to get to be able to have the public react to it. We talked about the secret agreements last time. There were 2 secret agreements between the operator and with the state planning office that they should have had information on to comment on, to get public input before contractual changes happen. So what I'm saying is, no, they shouldn't be intervening on everything. I agree with Charlie. I agree with the City of Old Town on that. The only time they really should be going directly to the board or in an intervening instance is when they're acting in the capacity of advising all 3 towns, which we enable them to do, and they're being precluded from carrying out those duties. That's where I'm at, Charlie.
Let me ask a question, because I want to follow up on what I heard about on F. If you in the resolve, you're giving them the ability to appeal a license, who pays for the legal fees and so forth for that appeal?
Ultimately, that's still going to be between the committee and the towns.
So they could appeal it, and if the town of Old Town says we're not paying for it, they have to go figure whether the Old and Outskirts want to go forward. If they don't, then they have to decide then the individuals they would go.
Yeah, there's no question that this is kind of an imperfect situation regardless. If any one of the towns decides they don't want to play anymore and don't send any more representatives, that now represents 2 towns who are active, and again, it's supposed to act on behalf of the 3 units simultaneously. It may not be functional.
The 2 secret agreements he's talking about, we totally agree, and we objected vehemently during the time that Mr. DeShane actually passed a resolution to correct that problem, is that the operating services agreement now cannot be changed without a public hearing. In other words, so that loophole per se has, and I will say that I do believe that they've been giving a lot of information. And I'll give you an example. In other words, the issues that have come up during the thing have had to do with truck traffic. We've had tremendous discussions about trucks. We've had complaints about odor. We had the DEP came in and gave many talks about odor. Biomedical waste we talked about. And we had all of the parties involved in the biomedical waste issue come to the meeting. Every issue that's been brought up by the public, I think, has been addressed by the ones that he talks about. Yes, we're very upset about them. I think it's been corrected. Tony would like to talk about a legal issue, in other words, with all of this.
Well, I still want to finish this thought out.
Yes,
you brought up.
sure.
Because, okay, I understand, but your other question that you asked is who do they report to? And I don't,
Very important question.
So I'm going to go back to Robert and help me, because I think what I heard is these guys report back to their own town.
That's what I think. Yes, Senator, I think that's what was probably intended in the original law, and again, that was the 121st. I wasn't here.
I was.
And you were on the committee. You passed it.
Yeah, but I got off it when we finalized it. So do we need to clarify this in this resolve?
Who they respond to?
Yes.
I always thought it was pretty implicit that the advisory committee is advising the towns that they're serving. I agree with Mr. Heinonen that they haven't finalized bylaws enough or any kind of method of reporting in an organized fashion to the municipalities they're supposed to be serving. I think that's probably between the towns and the committee as to how they can do that better.
So you don't think we need to do anything?
That's my own feeling is we don't have to.
But I don't. We truly don't believe it.
Representative Parker, I'm sorry.
If you read what's before us and you look at paragraph G, it says the report committee findings and recommendations concerning disposability to the city of Old Town and the town of Alden. So when you say who you're reporting to, you might want to add the Penobscot tribe.
Yeah, you did.
So doesn't that answer the question?
It does say G, it does say the report.
Yes.
So that may resolve your issue.
Right. But we've always felt that in other words, it reports to us, but this was set up by the state. In other words, we have, other than just being able to appoint committee members, in other words, they're not, we want to make it formalized how they do report. In other words, if they're going to be filing for intervenership or going to be filing for other stuff, in other words, in their name, in other words, are they actually, what's happening now is often it's referred to as the Old Town Advisory Committee because we have been hosting it, paying for it, whatever, and that's not necessarily the case. They don't represent our city council.
It seems to me that, as I read this, and maybe it's so vague, but it says that they report their committee findings to you. So if they decide to take an appeal process and they report that to you and you say, no, we're not going forward, then they don't have the finances to go forward.
But it doesn't say that in here. And I guess if they had to come back prior to and get approval of the city council, of Alton, of Old Town, and Indian Island, I guess we could say that.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you just seem to indicate that in order for them to take any kind of action in front of the board, they would have to get the permission of all 3 municipalities?
That's correct. Because they represent, evidently, you're saying that they would represent those 3 communities.
Right.
They should be taking a position that's favorable to all.
Which could mean that one of those could have a veto authority, basically.
But still, each community has the ability to do that on their own.
Yeah, certainly each community can intervene on their own merits, and especially the merits of an issue. What this gives them, the committee, the authority to do is say, hey, you left us out of this, and we're representing all 3 towns. One town can't veto what the other towns have an interest in going forward with. If the advisory committee is prevented from advising the other 2 municipalities, The third one can't just veto that and keep them from carrying out that responsibility. That's my concern.
God, please. I like watching you talk. You're doing good.
Good afternoon. I'm Peggy McGehee, and I'm standing in for Jim Cassiophikas as counsel for Old Town. And there's just a couple of issues which I think makes this a policy issue. There are a couple of legal problems with this. One is this is an advisory committee that's not incorporated. It's not an entity that even has the standing to appeal. So you have a legal problem from the get-go. The statute can say you can appeal, but the court will say no, you can't, because you are not an entity. It doesn't even have bylaws, much less incorporated. And the point that Charlie was bringing up is a key one to which body is the committee, the advisory committee representing. Because you can have a problem where the Old Town may take a position in an appeal that is opposite of what this committee would do, and you may have 4 entities. You may have Penobscot Nation, and the Old Town, and everyone. And so these are policy issues which should be put into this greater mix to be resolved, so that you don't have all the attorneys employed fighting one another about this. And then the court in the end saying you spent a lot of money, and spent a lot of public money for no purpose, because there should not have been this appeal. It's not legal.
And Representative DeShane.
Thank you, Senator. You actually took the words out of my mouth a few weeks ago when we discussed this, when I reviewed this with the Landfill Advisory Committee. I think what I said at the time was, it's so confusing right now. What happens if this advisory committee comes to a different conclusion than the town did? Under what circumstances could they appeal independent of the town authority? And what this is attempting to clarify is, the only way they can appeal is if they've been somehow denied the opportunity to carry out the legislative function that we gave them. You know, they have the authority. We created it. We told them what their responsibilities are. You can gather information. You're entitled to scientific information. You can get public input on things. You can comment on contracts. And then you go advise the towns. If somehow you're precluded from doing that because nobody ever told you that agreements are being signed in secret, then you have the ability to go forward to the department and have the standing to say, hey, we're empowered by law to do this. They didn't let us do it. Please to issue a denial or send it back for review or whatever until this committee can carry out its process. That's the limited standing I'm trying to give it. What I'm trying to also make clear is they don't have standing to go argue on the merits. They do the reports to towns. They tell the towns, here's what we think. Now it's up to you.
And it may be, Representative, that this committee can always file a complaint. It can do that today. The question is whether it's a legal entity so that it can make a formal appeal.
And recall that the board has already settled that once by giving them standing last fall when they did appeal on these merits.
The board and the court means something different.
Yeah, well, completely different.
Okay, all right.
And I'm not sure whether this would stand up in court, but it certainly stands up with the board and the commissioner at this point.
We appreciate your time.
That's
Our
right.
point is there anything else?
Representative Iyer has a question.
Why do you feel you need a Citizens Advisory Board? I know your answer, but I just want to hear you say it.
And I think that I can see that Charlie would like to answer that. I do have a thought, but I think his may
I know.
not.
Well, this will help me decide
Okay.
how he answers it. Yeah.
As I said, I believe the board is very important because it brings together all of the parties in one room to talk about the issues. Matter of fact, we had a meeting a few weeks ago when the chairman says, maybe we ought to just disband. Well, I'll tell you, there was a lot of people there, not necessarily the people who were at all the meetings, but that said, well, wait a minute, this is where we're getting information, this is where we get feedback, this is where, and I think that's what's really critical. It's really critical to us, in other words, to know what these people are thinking, to the direction that we should go as a community, the things that are important, in other words, the issues that are coming up. But it's important for them to, in other words, to advise us.
So you asked Representative DeShane to submit this bill to form a Citizens Advisory Committee.
We never asked that.
That's what I want to find out.
Representative Iyer,
Where'd it
the
come from?
Citizen Advisory Committee has already been established. That law
And
creating
did
it
you
has
want
already
that?
been established.
We want the Citizen Advisory
Okay.
Committee, but we necessarily don't want the, in other words, the additions.
As I understand it, the Citizen Advisory Committee was established when the landfill was purchased and then leased. That's correct. It goes back to when I was here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.